We are very honored to have Kayvaun Rowshankish, who's a senior partner with McKinsey, and really is involved with many different industries and a real focus on data and digital modernization for clients around the world. And so I would like to turn it over to Kayvaun. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and good morning. I am privileged to get the fun started today. Lots of good discussions ahead. Let me start with a quick intro. So I'm Kayvaun Rowshankish. I'm a senior partner with McKinsey. I lead our data transformation practice, which is where we focus on data. I founded it about a little over a decade ago. It cuts across all we do with AI, McKinsey technology, and risk management. And I also lead our data acceleration lab, which is where we invent things that don't exist out there that clients need. Things like infrastructure as code, AI-based data management tooling, accelerators for data products and digital twins, and much more. So I have a lot of fun with that. But my career actually started as a chef, so I was a fully trained chef. I can draw lots of analogies from that around pulling together ingredients, producing great concoctions, getting told off by customers when it wasn't what they wanted. But I was always infatuated with technology, and I doubled down on computer science, got into business, and have been leading data transformations for a good 30 years now. Let me get started with a quick story that will hopefully frame a little bit of what we're going to talk about this morning. Over the last few years, there's a telecoms, media, and technology company that has been on a journey to apply data and analytics to everything that they do. So they started by building a data product of their entire network. They built a data product to represent their customer, their call center, their entire engineering community. They built simulations around these data products. And then they interacted these data products and simulations, which you could call digital twins, with each other. And over the course of a few years, they had digital twins that represented most of what they had within their network, B2B and B2C area, and generated over $1 billion of impact. Now heading into what's a fairly tough market for telecoms, media, and technology companies, they're pretty well equipped now to compete on pricing, cost, customer and employee experience. And this is a little bit of what we're going to talk about this morning. We're going to talk about why I think that right now is the perfect data storm. We have alignment between supply and demand of data and analytics like we've never had it before. We have tooling that's easier to use than it's ever been before, and skills and competence amongst users that's far greater than it's ever been before. And we have a set of market dynamics that are making it both possible and necessary to innovate with data and analytics. So we'll talk about why I think it's a perfect data storm. We'll talk about companies that have thrived in this context in the past to demonstrate what data-driven enterprises are going to look like and how they're going to compete and win over the next few years. We'll talk about the 7 characteristics that exemplify a data-driven enterprise, and we'll talk about how we, as a data community, can avoid screwing up, realizing the impact of the opportunity ahead. So let's start with the macroeconomic environment. You know, first of all, this is not news to anyone, but obviously inflation is 6x what it was before the pandemic. Interest rates, 8x what it was before the pandemic. Supply chain is still messed up. And customer expectations, if you look at the job market, expectations around business growth, income, et cetera, is below the level that typically predicts the likelihood of a recession within the next year. And then there's byproducts and consequences of the digital adoption that's happened. mainly within the commercial real estate space, which could be the cause of the next recession if we have one. So there's a ton of different headwinds that we're facing. There's also a bunch of tailwinds. Obviously, technology maturity, availability of talent, ways of working that are far more productive, and innovations around MLOps, Gen AI, that are opening up opportunities that, frankly, were not fully available to us in the past. You combine that to what I mentioned earlier around the matching of supply and demand, ease of tools and skill sets coming together, and ROI, where the R is getting higher, the I is getting lower, and it is a perfect data storm. I'll talk about more recent history in a second, but if you look 80 years ago, post-World War II period, many of the factors were the same. We had high inflation, high interest rates, low unemployment, and a supply chain that was messed up. Coming out of that period, we had the golden age of capitalism, a massive economic boom. So the question I'd pose is, are we now in front of another economic boom that's powered by data and AI? So let's explore that a little bit. If you look at more recent history, we've examined this across thousands of companies over a series of cycles recently. Obviously, the financial crisis, the recovery from the financial crisis, the lead into the pandemic, and then obviously the pandemic, and then the recovery from that. We identified a series of companies that actually fared well during at least one of those cycles, and then we narrowed it down even further to the 100 companies that fared well across all of those cycles. And we found that there was a range of common characteristics to those firms, right? And here's a few of them. But the characteristics that we saw were a willingness to be disruptive, often even disrupting their own business models, use of the crisis to innovate, attraction of talent and bringing new engineering capabilities into the organization, and a willingness to invest through the cycle, often in data and analytics. Estee Lauder did it through personalization. United Healthcare did it through voice recognition in the call centers to detect symptoms and redirect calls. Blackstone through risk management. But let's dive into a few specific examples, starting with Netflix. We all know the story of Netflix, right? They disrupted the home movie market by introducing lower cost mail service movies and no fines for late delivery. They then disrupted that business model that they'd created, investing 60% of their income into developing a streaming service. More recently, they went heavily into personalization, very narrow segmenting to recommend movies for individuals. And if you look at the curation of proprietary content that they got into using data and AI, they have, while it's a fairly saturated market, there were periods where they did it well. One quarter in particular where they added 15 million customers, right? So a very good example of a firm that has continued to disrupt using AI and data through the cycle. Another example is Starbucks. So, historic use of data and AI. One example is where they used it to select sites for their stores using geospatial footfall analysis. More recently, heavy focus on personalization, shift to digital payments, and various other services that allowed customers to continue to buy from them during the crisis, during the pandemic, I mean. And then lastly, this is not just a B2C thing, right? In industrials, we've seen many firms innovate with data and AI. Freeport, a mining company, used it back in the day to analyze facial recognition to raise risk signals where drivers of the trucks in the mining sites were getting tired, and to rotate them out and or to have them take breaks. They've also used it to optimize the ore extraction from their sites to maximize profitability. So just some examples of some of the firms that were in that 100 that have continued to innovate through the cycle. So let's talk a little bit about these 7 characteristics, right? So what are the 7 building blocks or characteristics of a data-driven enterprise that these firms and many others have exemplified, and that we expect to see driving competitive advantage over the next few years? So first of all, I've touched on this a little bit with the first example I gave around the telecoms company, but it's about identifying every interaction, process, and decision point where you can drive impact with AI and data. It's about putting the tools in the hands of the broader community to be able to solve these problems, because you can't identify every problem that needs to be solved from an ivory tower. You've got to put the tools in the hands of the people that understand the problem. And that's obviously where we're seeing Gen AI and self-serve and various other capabilities. Number 3 is about shifting away from the constant flip-flop of different architectures to accept that actually the more important thing is the content that you put in that architecture, and the evolution from data domains to data products and curating data sets to drive impact. The fourth one is the operating model. So obviously shifting to a more product-centric operating model to enable the data products. 5th, and Richard spoke about this a little bit, but there's got to be a shift towards the CDO and data practitioners being more of a profit center as opposed to a cost center. The 6th is about solving problems beyond your boundaries, beyond the enterprise boundaries, partnerships, disrupting value chains and industries, sharing data so that you can solve problems without just having to leverage the people within your organization. And then lastly, the old and boring space of data management is going to become interesting. The use of alternative data sources, AI, and flipping the equations so that you use AI to solve data problems as opposed to using data to solve AI-based problems. So we'll go through each of these, a bit more time on the first few, and then we'll fly through. And then I'll save some time at the end to talk about what we should get right and not get wrong. And we'll take a few minutes for questions at the end as well. Okay, so applying data to every decision, process, and interaction. And I'll look at it a little bit based on the different functions that most institutions have, right? So Lilly, within their research and development department, were very focused on reducing time to market for their drug development and increasing the ratio of drugs that actually got to market. Apparently 12% of drugs typically make it through, so they viewed the 88% that weren't getting it through as the opportunity to go after. And they did this through sourcing a vast range of data to create more throughput, more precision in the drugs that were selected. They did it through analyzing the different sites for clinical trials and the patients to use for clinical trials. They identified all of the bottlenecks in the process to see where should they apply data and AI to accelerate the journey, increase precision. And they've had significant impact through doing that. Netflix we talked about. But if you look at what they've done from a marketing and sales point of view by looking at the different movies that are successful, right? The genres, the actors, the site locations, the scripts, and using that as a method to advertise and get more viewership and keep people coming back to watch the next series, the next season, been hugely impactful for them. If you look at BlackRock, they used AI and introduced AI into many of their analytical tools that they used for their own purposes, right? If you've heard of Aladdin, it's their flagship risk management analytics model, which now has been embedded with a vast range of AI. And it's a very good example of where firms have actually been able to monetize an asset that they built themselves. They now generate over $1 billion of revenue each year by selling this as a service to third parties. This is my favorite, actually. Palmaz, the inventor of the stent, the device that's used in heart surgery, applied all of the wealth that he generated through that invention to redesign the wine production industry. And so he looked at everything from the production of grapes. They have sensors in each of the barrels that detects the mix of alcohol, acidity, yeast, sugar. They've got, if you walk into their cellar, it's like walking into like a Mission Impossible like cockpit where they've got visualizations all across the wall that are live, and they will tell you the time frame for the barrel being ready and what the mix of alcohol and sugar content will be over that time, so you can have the appropriate interventions, you can figure out when to extract and so on. But it's, you know, this wine is now one of the most prestigious wines in Napa. So all fields where AI and data can be applied. We'll spend a little bit of time on this last example. So Lemonade is a digital-first insurance company. They looked at the entire insurance business model, tore it down, and found every opportunity to apply AI and data. They used AI Maya as a AI module to focus on the customer experience space. So selling policies, personalization of coverage, generating quotes, facilitating payments, all conducted through AI. They developed another AI module called AI Gem, focus on claims management. It's get used for 98% of the claims that come through, and 50% or more of those actually go all the way through instantaneously without any human intervention. And they have other AI modules for other parts of the business model. But what's, I think, interesting here is the impact is, you know, through all of that, they're able to provide services to insurance services to customers 80% cheaper than an average player. 40% of claims are instantaneous. Customer experience is amazing because I think claims are probably the most painful experiences that most insurance customers experience. And it's handled within minutes versus what's often months or weeks. And they did all of this while achieving the same loss ratio as a regular traditional insurance company that has literally decades of investment into analyzing losses. So hopefully that's a little bit of a flavor of how you can do the tear down and identify the opportunities where to apply data and AI. But that's not the only thing you have to do. You have to enable the workforce, empower them. You have to role model from the top. You have to build capabilities, many other things. And of course, you have to apply the right governance and security checks to make sure that these efforts don't go off the rails. That was the first theme. Let's talk about the second theme. So this is the fun part of putting the tools in people's hands. And obviously, this is the advent of generative AI, no-code, low-code, and self-serve. And just 3 examples to bring it to life. So Salesforce introduced Einstein GPT as part of their platform. Salespeople that have Salesforce can use it to identify high potential customers. They can use it to identify likely to churn customers. They can even use it to generate responses to customers. Microsoft's apps, Power Apps. This is basically a solution where you can use human language to instruct the tool to create an app. So human language to create a time and expenses application, an employee onboarding application, various other applications using the combination of Gen AI and no-code, low-code. And then good data, in collaboration with EAB, developed a suite of tools for educational companies, several thousand educational companies that would draw data in from a central environment and use Excel, PowerPoint, very basic tools to generate dashboards and reports themselves. And these are people within these thousands of institutions with very varying technical skills. So we're already seeing this take shape. I don't need to tell you all about the various examples of use of Gen AI. It's winning prizes across the board. It's passing exams that lawyers have spent years trying to pass, and tons of impact within code management, whether code generation or code validation for engineers. And it's also having impact within the creative space, generating adverts and movies. My favorite one, which is a little personal, is the one on the far right. My wife recently started a fashion company, and she came to me and she said, is there any kind of service or application I can use that can help me with designing a line? And I said, why don't you try DALL-E 2? So she got a subscription. She entered a load of designs and patterns that she liked, gave it a few instructions. Hey presto, it churned out a whole range of different designs that she can now get inspired by or use for her fashion line. So I thought that was pretty amazing. You know, if you hone in on what at least I think is the paradigm shift here, because Gen AI is actually not new, right? My team was using Gen AI as part of its AI-based data management tools over a decade ago, right? Google and others had the earlier instances of this a long time ago. The real paradigm shift here, I think, is the user-friendly nature of it, right? Putting AI in the hands of CEOs, mothers and fathers, children, and having them interact with AI and experience what it really is tangibly. So the complexity of the tools has become far, far lower. Meanwhile, the sophistication of those that use those tools has become greater. So we're at a perfect juncture to maximize the impact of this. But there's obviously a downside to this, right? And that is, as I think we all know, there's a level of confidence that gets built into anyone who's using these tools without a full appreciation of the hallucinations, the privacy issues, various other issues that come with it, and combine that with the lack of transparency into how content is generated, insights are generated. We have a bit of a challenge on our hands to evolve how we govern these environments without slowing down innovation. So let's move on to the third theme. The third theme is this pivot from constant flip-flopping between should I have a warehouse, should I have a lake, should I have a lake house, should we shift to mesh? I think hopefully we're reaching a point now where it's acceptance that you probably need a little bit of all of those things, especially if you're a large-scale institution. What's more important is to focus on how you curate the data for impact, right? Many have been on the journey of developing data domains I wouldn't say many have completed that journey, but it's a fairly mature space now. It's the right time to shift towards building out data products. And I know there's a range of sessions happening today to talk about this directly. Data products tackle this middle layer, right? So it's the data wrangling that our high-value employees, whether it's data scientists, business analysts, operations staff, have to go through every day, 40% of their time in some places, to pull data out of sources, prepare it for use cases, repeating that work every time they build a new use case. Data products cut straight into that, maximize reuse, minimize risk, reduce spend by creating curated data sets that are oriented towards multiple use cases. Here's an example of some work we did recently with a bank. We started by identifying the set of use cases that they wanted to enable, prioritize them based on impact, but then analyze them as well for the underlying capabilities and data products that would enable them. We quickly, no surprise, discovered that the customer data product was going to be the most important thing for them to go build. But we started by building it narrowly. Firstly, to enable acquisitions. We then layered in some more data to expand the customer data product to enable wallet share. And then slither by slither, we expanded the data product, creating the flywheel where every new use case, as you can see on the right there, cost inordinately less to deliver from a time and from a cost point of view. So we maximized reuse there, and you can see how this works. And this is just for one data product. Then you can start to look at other data products that then combine with the customer data product to generate even more scope of use cases. The fourth theme is the operating model that supports it. Right? And I think a lot of the time the question that we get is, well, what's different in the operating model versus the data governance and data domain operating model? Our view is that the data domain space doesn't change. Data domains are really a toll gate beyond which the data that's provided should meet enterprise standards. So it's very much looking upstream, it's governing, it's making sure you've got complete, accurate, protected data. And what it should do is it should liberate the data product teams to innovate, right? And focus on time to market, focus on reuse and impact. And that's a little bit of what this page says. So then the next theme is around shifting to a profit center. And this is actually a pretty prickly topic, right? Because nobody wants to give up the credit for generating impact. Usually it's owned by the front line, and it's very tough to get them to relinquish it. There are shifts, I think, towards double counting or a willingness to recognize the enablement of value, right? And I think we have to find ways of convincing our organizations to adopt that model. And so much of the value that's created through AI and data is value that's created in collaboration with the business or other parts of the firm, right? And without that double counting, it doesn't allow for the right kind of collaboration. So that pivot has to be made. But then there's also value that can be created directly with data and analytics, whether it's through monetizing assets or data products. One example of how to look at this, which we have developed with a few clients, is the cascade effect of taking the value that's created in this top row, which is the use cases, and I accept this is a busy slide, you don't need to read every box, but generally you'll get the sense that the top is the use cases, usually all the focus is on them, the value that's created gets attributed to those use cases, and everything below that line is viewed as a cost, which is totally the wrong way to look at it. If you, just to illustrate, take that top row, I think there's 8 use cases there, assume they're $5 million of impact each, 40 million of impact overall. They all use the customer data product, right? Customer data product is generating 40 million of impact. One of those use cases is generating 5. Where should the attention be? Where should the investment be? And you can do it even further down the stack, because the same principle applies. This results in being able to plan better as to what should you prioritize your build first. it allows you to connect with other types of management information, right? So if you're getting a sense for the true value of a data product, you can link it to the quality of the data in that product and various other metadata that you're gathering, so you can better manage your ecosystem. So let's flip through these a little more quickly. The sixth one is around sharing data beyond boundaries and solving problems beyond boundaries, so ecosystems, essentially. Petco is a good example of where they use data from partners to figure out how their retail stores were going to be impacted during the pandemic and respond to that. AccuWeather is a great example of competing with better quality data. Ultimately, they're recognized as generally the best and most reliable weather forecasts, if such a thing exists. Uber's a good example of an expansion from one business model using the same data they already had to then extend into delivering food. And then Fanatics, I think, if you're not aware, is a market exchange that connects consumers with a massive range of different sports merchandise. So real impact, real services generated here through a willingness to build networks, go beyond the boundaries of firms, and solve real problems in the market. So the last topic, and I'll spend a few minutes on this, and then we can open for questions. So please do think of some questions. Please do make sure they're questions, and we'll have a good discussion. So we firmly believe that if you look across the entire data management space, AI and data, well, let's say AI can actually accelerate and solve many of the long-standing problems that have existed for years. We can talk about all of them, but let me focus in on a couple of them, right? So these categories of lineage, metadata, and then data quality. And I'll use a couple of McKinsey assets that we've built to illustrate these, not because we're trying to push the assets, but I think they're a good illustration of how you can actually go about solving some of these problems with AI. Let's start with lineage. Lineage, for any of the banks or financial institutions here, will recognize this as the bane of their existence. Very focused on this top row around documenting data flows from a given report all the way back to the point of digitization at an attribute level, every transformation, painstaking, especially since banks are generally not fully on cloud. They've got a ton of legacy, and most vendors in this space have thrown the towel in on legacy, and they're just focusing on doing this in cloud because it's easier. There are some firms that are solving for this, which I'll talk about in a second, but the reality, I think, is if you can get lineage right, like full forensics of all of your data in motion and at rest, you start to have the basis of a digital twin of your data ecosystem. And the realm of possibilities that opens up is massive. Not just because you can manage your data ecosystem better, but your data ecosystem is a representation of your business model. And then anything's possible. But some simple examples here are, simplification. Imagine you've got this massive legacy platform that you can't shut down because you don't know what business critical processes are dependent on it. The right lineage will expose that and give you confidence in shutting it down. Data privacy, obviously understanding where your sensitive data is, where it's flowing, where it's being used. Helping ML use cases by identifying where there's data that they maybe need that they aren't aware of. And obviously helping accelerate cloud migration. So people, certainly in the banking industry, everybody seems to just be focused on that top line with not a full appreciation of the additional impact that can be generated beyond that. There's some tools, not many, that, as I said, can solve for the vast range of data across multiple heterogeneous systems. If they're well documented, if you've got code, column names, and et cetera, you can do it. What we've been trying to extend this to is the hard problem of transformations. And so looking at concatenations, netting, various other business rules that are applied as data flows from one system to another. And we've been doing this through inferred lineage using AI, which I'm happy to talk about offline. But I think we're getting close to really solving this problem. And then, as I said, the realms of possibilities will open up. Metadata is an interesting one. I love this case. This was in the music realm. A company called Primephonic had got fed up, along with its community of classical music lovers, with the lack of classical music services. It's, if you compare, let's say, a search for The Weeknd and Save Your Tears, you're going to find the song, right? There's maybe 3 versions of it. There's The Weeknd solo, there's The Weeknd with Ariana Grande, but maybe there's one other. But you're going to find it. With classical music, if you go search for Chopin Nocturne, Opus 9, number 2, there's thousands of them. They're performed by thousands of different artists. They're sometimes performed in a studio, sometimes in various different venues. And for classical music lovers, that nuance is important. And Spotify and the various other music services weren't solving that problem. And so this company, Primephonic, used crowdsourcing of classical music lovers to gather the metadata to tag those performances in a way that they can find exactly the song with the performer in the location that they were looking for. And it was so remarkable that Apple bought them. But it shows the power of metadata, right, is the point. Lastly, on these themes, I'll just touch on data quality. I think this is probably the nut to crack that is the highest visible issue for most firms. We're in a space where for years we've been doing basic adjustments, reconciliations, rudimentary anomaly detection, and various other techniques. There are definitely innovations around using Gen AI, using entity resolution, and various other techniques. But what we found is firms invested in these capabilities, but then they came across a different type of problem, and they found themselves having a hammer when they actually had a screw that they needed to screw in. And so what we concluded was that firms actually need a broad set of modules, a full toolkit with various different techniques that can be deployed, assembled through workflow with the right data science and data engineering team to go deploy them, which is basically what this says. And in those modules, you should have modules for detection, diagnostics, a root cause analysis, correction recommendation, human in the loop because you don't want to let it loose, and then decent audit trails, right? And you should be able to pull the right set of tools together depending on the problem at hand. Here are some examples, right? We've obviously got some of the basic stuff like anomaly detection, but what we've done with the anomaly detection is we've applied time series to it so that you're actually looking at the anomalies based on the context of someone's or something's behaviors over a period of time. Natural language processing is basically Gen AI. We use the original version of Gen AI as part of that. Entity resolution is a very valuable tool in this suite, gets used regularly. And there's about 30 more of these. And we also use alternative data sources to bounce against records to increase confidence levels around the accuracy of a particular record if there isn't other reliable sources to compare to. And some examples of impact that we've had. I'll point to the third one there. It was a bank with millions of anti-money laundering cases, and they'd stacked up a legal team to go work on these for over a year. And the regulators were breathing down their neck. So we came and said, let us experiment with this thing, see if we can solve it. And within 7 weeks, we'd used the Word2Vec Gen AI tool that we had to create a whole new reference table for occupation codes, which was the driver of most of those false positives. The aerospace example is a nice one too. We worked with a space agency that was doing all kinds of analysis around climate change and other natural forces, but it essentially involved data being sent from satellites down to base stations. And as you could imagine, for whatever reason, debris or other weather patterns or other technical failures, the feeds would fail. And it would take them weeks to figure out why did it fail and actually fix it. So we trained the AI to identify firstly when the feed had failed, but to look at characteristics that might indicate why it had failed, so you can get engineers to go fix it immediately, so that you don't lose weeks of data. Anyway, a whole range of other use cases that we've applied it to that hopefully illustrate that this isn't about just getting a data quality tool and letting it loose on your ecosystem. You actually need to have expertise involved. You need humans in the loop. You need to have a variety of tools that you can deploy. Okay, so what is it that we need to make sure we get right? What should we not get wrong, so we make sure we maximize the realization of the opportunity at hand? You know, the one, and I think the most important thing here is obsession with impact, right? Everything we do, we should strive to measure the value of having done it. You know, whether it be through the cascade effect that I was describing or some other means, and there are always a variety of ways of measuring impact. But it also involves engaging with the business to understand what impact they care about. Invest in a targeted way. Don't spread it too much, because ultimately you may not get there. So focus on the things that are realizable and invest there. I mentioned stabilizing the architecture. I think if you look at firms that have been very slow on their journey, it's because every 2 to 3 years they flip-flop to another architecture and they're basically starting their journey again. Evolve governance in 2 ways, right? One is to embrace the new risks that are emerging, but also to use a lot of the innovation to automate governance in the way that I was just describing. And then, you know, 5th, make data the prized possession, right? It's a real asset. It drives the impact. Actually start measuring it and improving it that way within the organization. It's amazing over the last 5 years how boards and CEOs are starting to appreciate that shift. And then lastly, experiment, but don't do research experiments. I would say experiment with impact, right? So experiment with different ways of realizing impact, and you'll learn. You will realize impact. You'll get the flywheel going. So with that, I'll say thank you. And hopefully you had enough coffee this morning to get through this and not too much of something else last night. But thank you, and let's open for questions. Thank you.
You reminded me in that one slide of yours, where you said AI is getting simpler and simpler with the tools, and the users are getting more. I can give you that because we want the whole world. The whole room to hear it. Okay. Yeah. That one slide of yours where you described AI, you know, it's getting simpler and simpler, and the sophistication of the users are getting higher and higher, you know, and it reminds me 100 years ago, we had the same exercise where we had horses and humans with shovels competing against the machines. And I mean, 100 years later, there's no argument.
Right.
We don't argue with the bulldozer, and I've seen what they can do. But we trained the guys, you know, to actually use the right levers. So if you're describing that, we are exactly at that point in time where the AI is actually, and we can't compete with the machines. Now, if you take that into the quantum realm, which is, I think we don't want to admit it, but it's there, and you take the quantum field, and now we need to get actually user level up to it. And at that meeting point, I would like to see your views on that. At that meeting point where we are right now, I think we're ignoring a massive thing, which is letting the AI loose, exactly what you described, and just let it run like a bulldozer without pulling the levers, compared to what do we do with our collective, you're not really there to say it, but it's a data issue, which is the collective consciousness. And how do you see we can frame that? In my opinion, it's a CDO. It's absolutely a CDO task. What's your views on that?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think CEOs and the entire C-suite need to get savvy on the risks associated with this, because they can't delegate that. They can't delegate the management of that. Certainly, I've been impressed by how fast we've moved with some of the governance capabilities that have come alongside Gen AI. But this is more than a tools issue. This is it's a philosophical issue. It's a values issue for any institution that wants to protect their customers, protect their employees, and in some cases even create competitive advantage through being safe custodians of their customers. So I'd completely agree. There's a lot to learn from history, and if you look at the journey that we went on from going from horses to cars and bulldozers and so on, there's a ton of governance wrapped around those machines, right? Which they didn't appreciate at the time when they first released them. It's come over time. And I think the same sort of journey is going to happen, hopefully in a more streamlined fashion for AI. Any other questions?
Hey, Kayvaun, thanks a ton for the presentation. I got a question. So, first of all, I'm a fellow colleague of yours, alumni at McKinsey, 12 years, also doing data work, and now I'm an active practitioner, CDO. And one thing you didn't talk a lot about, but which was already at McKinsey a big thing that we train our clients, is the data literacy piece, right? Because if you don't get the users to use all of the data products, all of that, still there's no value from everything you build. What's your perspective on that?
I think that's absolutely right. Yeah, I did kind of skip over it. It was in there, but look, I think that this is the tough human nut to crack, right? Because there's a lot of academies out there, but they're very sort of disconnected from the reality, right? You've got engineers that actually get their hands dirty and work on things and learn through doing, but getting the business community to actually engage on what their role is and why it's important to behave differently in this space is quite hard to do. What I've seen that's been effective is using real case examples where, for example, at a financial services firm, showing how capital allocation increases because of dirty data feeding into models being the result of somebody just checking the first thing on a drop-down menu or skipping some field, and therefore they get the most conservative treatment in their risk. You can start to expose those things, and we've had instances where we've done that, and you get sales and trading desks with like little printouts, so I shouldn't do this, I shouldn't do that, and you start to change behavior through those sorts of means. I think it's illustrations like that, but also if you go to the product operating model that I was describing, one of the main outcomes of implementing a product operating model is the two-in-the-box type concept where you start to draw the business in to the journey and actually make them part of it, have them experience what it is like to solve one of the problems that they have, and get them part of that sort of multidisciplinary team. That's often the best way to learn.
I love what you said when you talked about the data products part around companies need to get comfortable with duplicating value associated with it. And then you gave the example of, one of these data products may be worth $30 million in value unlocked, but one specific example is $5 million. I think we're on that journey, and I think that helps ensure that you get the investment in the data products. Now it becomes difficult of like, how much do you invest in that versus the use cases themselves, because you don't get the value from the data product itself. Have you seen any good techniques of how to compare the value between those two, because they're different in how they're actually realized?
I don't think the actual mechanics of it is hard. right? I mean, I think the way you go at it is you have the use case team combined with the data product team, and so you're building the data product at the same time as building the use case. And then you move on to another use case, and then you maybe bring some of the original use case team, but some new individuals in. Ultimately, there's particularities around how you measure the impact of a use case, A/B testing, and so on and so forth. But once you've got that right, you've got the value of the use case, you just cascade that down. And then you do the same with the next one, you just cascade it down. I think the trickier part of all of this is the human side of getting people buy into that methodology and being willing to sort of accept maybe two different ways of measuring value. Because obviously when you sum up all of the impact generated, it's not going to add up to the bottom line of the firm. But it does, you've got to accept that as a way of sort of sharing a real dashboard of contribution to drive the right behavior.
Hi, Kayvaun. Cindy Housen, Chief Data Strategy Officer at ThoughtSpot. I love the skills slide, and I agree with the recommendation to infuse AI in all the processes. But assuming you will agree that the problems with AI start with the data, all data is biased, most data has poor data quality. So how would you prioritize, and very few are transparent on what data the AI has been trained on. How would you prioritize fixing the problems with AI earlier in the process?
It's a very good question. I mean, look, I think there are many parts of the journey that we're on that haven't changed, right? I mean, before this year with Gen AI, there was this shift towards building data products already existed, and making sure that you kind of removed bias and you had the right quality of data, and all of the sort of modeling and model drift and model bias that was built into the algorithms as well was an issue back then. Gen AI just introduces some newer, slightly more magnified risks. But I think the journey is still very much the same, right? There are some additional sort of challenges around far greater levels of unstructured data, far greater complexity in the models that you're using. We're not like we're brought in from the outside and applied to your data. But I think the approach to focusing on the data products, getting the data products right, dealing with the unstructured data to form those data products to enable the Gen AI or whatever the AI use case is at hand is still the same. And it's about general data governance. It's using new tools to identify issues with the data that you hadn't observed or somewhat insidious, and using ways of scaling up the remediation of them.
Thank you very much.
So,
And I know there were a number of other questions, but we reached our time to take a break. So I just encourage you to catch Kayvaun as he's trying to escape out to the break, and I'm sure he'll be happy to answer questions. We are going to move into a break for the next 30 minutes, but I do think the thing that I want to highlight from Dr. Wang's comment is the JFK quote, which is, we don't do this because it's easy, we do it because it's hard. And data is hard. And the things that Kayvaun took us through around how to approach this, I think we're spot on. But as you leave, think about applying these new techniques to the data, because we're kind of like Edison, right? Over the last number of years, we've failed thousands and thousands and thousands of times of trying to get data correct. And there's all kinds of reasons for that. But in order to do AI and some of these advanced technologies, we have to get data correct. So there's still work to be done, and we need to figure out how to apply. And I think you did an excellent job of highlighting how generative and some of these new techniques can actually be applied to the data to then be able to be used in the models. So with that, I'll let you go to a break, and the next session starts at 10:30 in all the breakout rooms. Thanks.